in all kinds of difficulty here. Barrios, a slapping left hook by Barrios. Barrios canvassing the champion.
Down goes Frazier! Down goes Frazier! Down goes Frazier!
Be the round of the century.
Look at Holyfield. What a warrior.
If he weighs 205, his heart weighs about 204.
It happened. It happened. I can't believe it. It was astonishing, and he hurts him with a hook. Corrales comes back a straight right. Now Castillo against the ropes. Unbelievable. Evans low. Corrales fighting. Castillo's in trouble. Weeks gets in, and the fight is over. Corrales with a remarkable dramatic turnaround to win this fight.
If he gets up, he probably wins the fight. I can't believe it!
Unbelievable. Richard Steele stopped the fight with fewer than 5 seconds to go. You're going to watch Lou Duva go crazy now. You're going to watch Lou Duva go absolutely berserk.
Hello Boxing Asylum listeners and welcome back to Punches from the Past, the show where we delve into boxing's rich history and talk about the fights that really mattered. I'm Steve and joining me on the call for this Season 2 special is Nuthouse stalwart Andy Patterson. In previous episodes you heard us travel back in time to cover the likes of Joe Lewis and Max Schmeling, Dwight Mohammed Karwi against Evander Holyfield, and most recently Carl Froch's 2 battles with Mikkel Kessler. This time though we find ourselves in the Miami arena for a red-hot rivalry between Brazil's Acelino Freitas and Argentina's Jorge Barrios in August 2003. Freitas brought the WBO and WBA super featherweight titles into the ring with him, but the Brazilian national hero had been stifled by inactivity and suffering from personal issues. Andy, given the backdrop to the fight, taking on a tough, heavy-punching wild man like Barrios, who made Marcus Maidana look somewhat orthodox with his style, it was a risky move by Freitas at the time.
Certainly was. I mean, there was some really good top names running about the division at that time. Obviously, Freitas been a big fan's favourite coming up in the early 2000s. Probably, he probably came slightly to note in the late 90s, but in the 2000s, he really did come out and he was really, people were taking note when he knocked out Anatoly Alexejov in was it 1 round? It was so bad that the knockout was so bad. The guy was actually unconscious for 5 minutes in the middle of the ring. And that's when he picked up the WBO title. And you say in your intro there, actually, that would be the 10th defence against Barrios, his WBO belt, and the 3rd defence, his WBA title. Freitas was a fantastic boxer puncher. He was probably considered at one point as one of the best punchers in the world. Probably even one of the best finishers in the world as well. Power in both hands, quality 1-2. Maybe no fully great in technical aspects and that, but he'd mastered the basics, and that's really what he needed. And I suppose as well, when you think about him, or if you look at him coming up through with his WBO title reign, the likes against Barry Jones, Peter Buckley. Well, obviously I've not seen that fight, but guys like say Carlos Ramirez and Javier Yaguru and Yo Casamor, you could see he had quality, but against the likes of Barry Jones and that, who you wouldn't call a big hitter, showed that his deficiency, something in Freitas, that his chin could be slightly kind of called into question. He had been dropped a few times in his career, and but for a guy, as I say, he's a big guy for the featherweight division, super featherweight division at 130 pounds. You just wonder how he kept making it all that time, but he did. I think against Barry Jones, he needed to make it 2 attempts to make the weight. And you could see the size difference actually between him and Barrios in the ring that night. But he was big for the weight, and in the end, after this fight, he would eventually move up in weight.
Yeah, I first became aware of Freitas. I know I've mentioned this before whenever we did the Trinidad Hopkins fight, but whenever I was first getting back into boxing as a hardcore fan around 2000, 2001, I started buying these cassette tapes, as they were, at the back of Boxing News and Boxing Monthly. They pretty much stopped doing them now because of copyright issues. But a lot of the guys, what they used to do is do career sets, and they would get like a 4-hour tape and put it on long play, and you get 8 hours, and the quality was absolutely shocking because it had been copied about 30 times before it got to you. But I bought one of these for Acelino Freitas because I was just trying to educate myself on the sport, and I picked him. I picked Fernando Vargas, who has always been one of my favourites ever since. But the Freitas one, some of the early ones, you could barely even make out what was going on, but you could see in fights against the likes of John Montantes, Lemuel Nelson, this little tournament that Al Bernstein actually makes note of. And the thing was about right up to Barry Jones, as you mentioned, nobody was last in the distance. But Freitas was the puncher. But after he beat the Cuban, Joel Casamayor, and he took the WBA crown to add to his WBO crown, he viewed this fight, which was like a classic Brazil versus Argentina rivalry, as another career-defining fight. And by this point, as you said, he was the puncher, he was vulnerable, but he was able to do that a little bit more. He showed a bit more boxing nuance, I thought, rewatching this fight so many years later. He was rolling the head, he had a little bit of a jab. He wasn't quite the one-dimensional slugger that I had in my head, but I mean, he was definitely a superstar in Brazil. There's absolutely no doubt about that. I mean, he had his wedding televised across Brazil. The people just loved him. But I mean, putting Freitas to one side and mentioning Barrios, he was the complete opposite. He arrived as a relative unknown, no world level experience. It was his American debut. And he was a true character. You know, he was a singer, he was a celebrity, he danced into the ring. He was like a no fucks given type of individual. He was playing to the crowd, an absolutely brilliant, vocal, hostile crowd. And this guy who came out of nowhere, he was just loving the occasion.
Believe it or not, he actually even became an actor at one point. But just to finish up with Freitas, mate, I mean, just mentioning you talking about his wedding being on TV and stuff. I remember Art Palullo, who Banner Promotions, I believe he promoted all his fights in America. He once claimed that he could draw 90 million viewers in Brazil. He even quipped at one point that he was a bigger star than Michael Jordan in Brazil. Michael Jordan was like the man back in like the 80s and 90s and that. You know, so that's like all-time great type stuff you're talking about. But only likes of Barrios and that. I mean, you know, and before him, you know, you had the likes of Carlos Monzon and Nicolino Locci, and you know the great flyweight Santos Lacera, who fought like Charlie Magre and Gilberto Roman and Zapata and all that. You know, as you say, flashy. You know, had these big, massive sunglasses. You know, look like, you know, MC. What do you call him again? Timmy Hammer. Is it Timmy Hammer? His name is. What do you call that guy again? Timmy Mallet.
Timmy Mallet, yeah.
It's like Timmy Mallet with the glasses on. But he was a come forward brawler. He wasn't, as you say, wasn't refined as Freitas as a technician. But outside the boxing, I said he dabbled with like being an actor, and he was a model, and he sang and all that type of stuff. But as we were researching this, Steve, we were talking about this off air and that, but it's 2018. It must have been absolutely brutal trying to find fights of this guy going, you know, back at the late 90s, early 2000s, because even to this day, you can barely find any early footage of his early career. You know, 40 of his 41 fights before Freitas were off fought in Argentina. Sole fight being away from home was in Italy, which he won by TKO in the 8th round and picked up the much vaunted WBU title, you know. So
one of the WBU titles, I think this maybe the European version or something.
Exactly. But it says he didn't really have any notable names. Apart from one name you'll probably know better than me is Afif, you call him
Afif Djelti, yeah.
Djelti, the French Algerian ex-European champ. And other than other few national champs from South America like Chile and Paraguay and that, there was nobody I note really on Barrios' record.
Yeah, Afif Djelti, I obviously don't want to go down too much of a black hole, but I am planning on doing a bit on him because he was quite the character. Barrios actually beat Djelti in Argentina for the WBO title, but Djelti's claim to fame was that back in the early 2000s, whenever Sky was showing a lot of these IBO and WBU title shots, he actually upset the odds with a win in Britain for the IBO title, and then he came back on another 2 occasions and beat another couple of guys, the likes of Alex Moon, Charlie Shepherd, not really British level operators, but Djelti by this point was about 40. He was a French-based Algerian, and he's the only name really of any note on Barrios' record. I mean, the other notable name which is relevant is this Cesar Emilio Domine, who beat Barrios, but I mean, it was a 1997 disqualification, so you can pretty much write that off, and Barrios beat him in a rematch straight away. So he was coming into the Freitas fight not he was he had been defeated, but I mean, it was by sort of strange circumstances, and he had this WBU belt, and he was a bit of a puncher. You never really know, Andy, do you, about these guys? We see these Ecuadorians, Venezuelans, not to stereotype too much, Colombians in particular. They come over to America, they bring them into the likes of Miami, and they're a bit hit and miss, aren't they? They're punchers, but you don't know whether they're the real deal, or whether, like a Prescott, or whether they're like a Ricardo Torres, or maybe like
Edison
Walter
Miranda.
Estrada or an Edison Miranda, or somebody who's just been knockover jobs and isn't very good. But this Barrios, I mean, the guy could definitely punch, and fair play to Showtime as well for plucking him out of obscurity and forcing the fight together, a double title affair. And just going back to the crowd, I mean, can you imagine? It was August.
No.
The play in Miami, the place would have been absolutely red hot, wouldn't it?
Aye, inside and outside the ring, inside the arena, mate. I mean, obviously, as you say, Brazil, Argentina, it's a natural rivalry. I mean, the two countries have been attached to each other, it's a day dot. The relations go back hundreds and hundreds of years. In a sporting sense, it's just red hot, as you say. It's a natural storyline type fight. Fair play to Showtime for picking it up. Carnival atmosphere if you listen to it, and both men, huge names, stars, and big attractions in their respective countries. It was just a natural. I mean, it was. I wouldn't even think I couldn't even think of two fighters at the minute actually for Argentina and Brazil that you could actually put in there. It could be classed as, it would bring that type of kind of fever atmosphere to the. Obviously, you get the atmosphere, but you wouldn't really kind of get this kind of high level type fight, so to speak.
Yeah, by this point, Freitas had fought quite a few different places around the world. He'd been to Canada. He'd had the win over Barry Jones. He'd come back on Sky TV as well in Sheffield and knocked out Daniel Alisea, who was a decent heavy punching contender around that time. He had a win over Orlando Soto, who Barrios had beaten as well. He definitely had the better names on his record since he beat Casamiro, who was an excellent fighter. Casamiro, very tight one that. Yep. But a lot of people thought that maybe 26-0 Casamiro did enough, but Freitas just sneaked it. And then he'd had this fight with the African Daniel Atta, who was unbeaten, but he was more of a tough guy, really. He was like sort of in the Ben Taki mold at the time, and Freitas had got past him. But then after that Taki fight, Atta fight, he'd had a period of inactivity going up to Juan Carlos Ramirez, and then he'd had another 7 months or 6 months before he fought Barrios. It was his personal problems were getting in the way, and he was rusty just going into the fight itself in round one. There was a chance that the inactivity could have caught up on him because he was always such an active fighter, Freitas, to this point.
Yeah, but he did start. I think he started the first round pretty well, actually. Even though you looked at Barrios looking to land the big bombs, again, as I say, you could see that Freitas is by far the most refined technician than Barrios. But if you look at kind of late in the first round, Steve, is like Freitas lands a left hook, a right uppercut that just wobbled Barrios, and you could just see there and then that Barrios looking to hold on and turned his back. It was a clear Freitas round, but for like rounds 2 and 3 and maybe kind of going into the middle half of that fight, you could just see Barrios was just constantly being aggressive, pushing Freitas in the back foot. And maybe I was slightly kind of harsh on maybe Freitas was saying that he wasn't great in every sense. He had his strong points, but I suppose in this fight you had to kind of learn or fight off the back foot, be conservative, because he probably did have to kind of cut weight maybe kind of late and stuff, and having to deal with that pressure constantly and stuff, because I wouldn't really kind of care. But if you look at it, just the pure aggression of Barrios, okay, the second round was maybe quieter, but you can see in the third round was constantly marching forward, just looking to land the huge shots, and Freitas looking to counter with solid right hands that would shock Barrios briefly, and that you could see it as well when he was landing his shots. Freitas, that it had the more meat, it had the more sting, and you could see Barrios just kind of getting offset by it.
Yeah, Al Bernstein was doing his 3 things for each fighter, and Freitas, it was really very simple what Al said and very effective. He needs to just jab right hand. I mean, it's pretty basic stuff.
A jab and a straight right hand. We've seen nothing like that from Barrios so far in this fight.
That was what got Freitas to that point. Just don't come out wildly. And, maybe the crowd got ahead of him at that point in the first round. But once he got that signature left jab, right hand combination going, I thought he looked good. Freitas obviously trained by Oscar Suarez. I believe I'm right in saying he was of the infamous Nassim Hamed corner when he tried to bring Suarez and Manny Stewart together, Andy.
I'm trying to remember that one myself now, mate. Just you mentioned that name.
I think it was, yeah. But Suarez was an excellent trainer. I mean, that was a farce that night with the Nassim Hamed situation. But Suarez definitely knew what he was doing. And Freitas, by the second round, was showing a lot of good head movement. But the one thing that struck me, and you mentioned it as well, Barrios he looked so technically poor. That left hook to the body, I mean, amateurish wouldn't even do it, would do it a disservice. You can see how someone is technically proficient, as like a Joan Guzman, a favourite of mine, admittedly, later toyed with Barrios so well because he was wild, he was unorthodox, some really weird moves he was coming off with.
Yeah, it's just again, fact is, I really don't know what his amateur career was. I couldn't find anything on Barrios. As I says, I had a hard time trying to find any footage of him. He wasn't. He was what he was, wasn't he? He just threw well shots, just lacked proficiency, I suppose, in a jab in the right hand, and his left hook to the body, and that was like he always kind of left himself open for a kind of left hook counter as well. You know, the biggest thing about him was his chin, his heart, and his willingness just to march forward and keep coming for as long as possible. I really didn't want to jump away forward in front of me here, but as the fight was wearing on and stuff, even though Freitas being what he was, a far better fighter, I did think as the fight gradually kind of started to creep towards the end and stuff, that you could see that I personally felt that Barrios was leading the fight, but there was definitely quieter rounds. I thought round two was probably quieter compared to the first round. Maybe Barrios maybe shaded it purely on his aggression, probably. But again, as I say, he just kind of kept it going again. The third round just kind of came forward. Freitas, looked the counter with single right hands, and then he would lean back, and that was probably one of the things that I would really hate about Freitas was his defence. It definitely was leaky, but in the pocket, he would actually he would throw the right hand, he would drop his hands, and then try to kind of lean back, kind of like Hamed style, Ali type style, kind of bring the head back. And it did work at times, but sometimes he would get caught with it. And it's a testament to the fact that he used to get dropped. I think he was up to that fight. I think, Steve, I think he might have been dropped something like 5 or 6 times going through his career.
Freitas down 3 times, including his last fight. 2 freight train right hands by Freitas. Let's see if they hurt Barrios.
Yeah, when I first watched this fight, I'm pretty sure I watched the Sky TV version. I think back then Sky used to show them on a Sunday morning, and I hadn't seen the Showtime version. Throughout the fight, Al Bernstein seemed fairly confident with his scoring, that Freitas was in control of the fight, and ringside, it was definitely tightening up with 2 of the scorecards of the ringside reporters. One of the reporters had Barrios ahead pretty much throughout the fight, and I could swear, I can't remember because I haven't seen it again, but at the time it seemed to me, before I watched this fight back, as if Sky maybe had Barrios ahead. I had a feeling that Barrios was winning the fight, and Freitas's knockout was a come from behind job. That could be me just misremembering the past or something. But when I was rewatching this, Al Bernstein, as I said, seemed to be pretty confident that Freitas was doing okay. I mean, in the third round, Freitas fell on the advertising Toblerone, but that was just from excess water. There was no knockdown there. But one thing that did happen of interest in the third and then the fourth was that Barrios got cut across the left eye, repeated right hands. He showed a good chin, but that was to play a pretty significant part throughout the fight, that cut. To be fair to them, I think around the middle rounds, the cut man, I know the trainer was Claudio Moreno, and the cut man between them were working on it. And they were asking him for more side-to-side movement to get out of the way of Freitas' right hand, because every time it was landing, it was opening this cut, and it became a significant factor as the fight wore on. But that opened in about the third round, I think.
Yeah, it definitely was the third round, mate. I'm pretty sure it was. But as we mentioned, though, it didn't really kind of deter Barrios. Okay, he maybe adopted more head movement, lateral movement, but the forward march was there. And again, Freitas was just, his best 2 punches, the jab, right hand, and that's all he threw, kind of mostly throughout the night. I think the round 4 was a really kind of close round. Neither was really kind of landing a significant punch, so I maybe kind of shaded it to Barrios in that round, and maybe kind of drew it level 38 by round 4. By round 5, I think both guys are missing well shots, especially earlier in the round. But I felt maybe Barrios, I don't know about yourself, Steve, but I thought Barrios kind of that late surge in the 5th maybe just did enough to shade it. But I can understand. The version that I've got was the Sky version. You've seen the Showtime.
Yeah,
I'm trying to remember. I think they had it quite tight. So by round 5, I think I had Barrios up by 1 round. But it's some especially like round 2 and round 4. There wasn't really any significant action. there wasn't really significant punches landing and stuff. So it was what you kind of really fancied as an observer of the box and try to score those 2 rounds. So you could have had it either way. It could have been 2 for Freitas, 2 for Barrios, and it could have been a completely different wide scorecard altogether.
Doing it. I believe Acelino Freitas really looks rusty. He's had 4 rounds of boxing total in the last 12 months. That was the knockout of Juan Carlos Ramirez. And this is not a technically perfect performance by Freitas.
You have to remember, Ramirez not a primetime player as Barrios just grabs hold of Freitas' legs. Ramirez passed his prime. It was an easy win for Freitas. Although he had to come off the canvas, but then he just dominated, stopped him.
Yeah, whenever we said we agreed we were going to do this fight, for some reason I always had it in my head that it was Barrios ahead and Freitas had done a come from behind knockout. It wasn't quite the case as it turns out, but it's good to go back and watch these fights without the revisionism. I mean, the good thing about this was they're bringing 70-odd wins between them into the fight. They're both 27 years old. They're in their primes. You can forgive them for getting carried away. The place looked manic. The atmosphere looked amazing. Even when they were coming to the ring together, everyone was having a great time. It was a frenzied atmosphere, but it didn't seem like it was going to fall over into violence or hostilities. And maybe that was what pushed them on to throw a lot of wild shots. Although Barrios, that was just the way he was throughout his career. Freitas looking a little bit rusty, Al Bernstein said around the 5th round. And the thing was, by the 6th and 7th, as you said, Barrios was coming on strong. And these weird punches that Freitas was ducking away from, all of a sudden they started landing. I mean, this lunging up jab, come hook to the throat that Barrios kept throwing was actually snapping Freitas' head back at times. And I thought it was actually funny in the 7th round when the referee, who became an increasingly pertinent factor in the fight, Mr. Jorge Alonso, he was shouting at Freitas for pulling the head down, and he was shouting no mas, which obviously means no more, don't pull the head down. But I just thought that was an eerily relevant phrase in the boxing lexicon, the old no mas. But of course, Freitas, he was struggling with the ultra physical nature of the fight. And do you think it would be fair in saying by the time we got to the middle towards late rounds, maybe then the inactivity was possibly catching up on Freitas a little bit and enabling Barrios to get closer?
Yeah, he was happy to box and jab and move I wouldn't say as much as possible, but try and be kind of very conservative with it. One big thing it probably did maybe just slightly turned the tide in the fight a little bit in that 6th round was, I don't know if you noticed it between rounds, Steve, was that the doctor was in actually looking at Barrios' right ear.
Yes.
He'd actually perforated his eardrum. I think it was a right hand by Freitas at some point.
Blood to the eardrum. I'm assuming the doctor was more the referee. The referee called the doctor over maybe because he was concerned about concussion, because that's a sign of concussion, isn't it? Blood from the ears.
Yeah, or a brain injury or something. But by that point, I probably had a draw. But round 7, I did think Freitas started far more positive, compared to during other rounds. That I think, apart from the first, that was probably the first time I've seen Freitas really kind of start more positive. I did think Barrios looked slightly affected by the ear. He wasn't as, forward marching. He wasn't, putting it on the line as much. He was kind of slightly conservative, hanging back a little bit. I did think, and you could look to see that at times he was looking to counter, certainly for mid-distance and stuff. But instead of kind of coming forward, you gave Freitas time to kind of land his shots, and you could probably say that Barrios probably did have part success in that round, but and he did try kind of late charge as well. But because he's how he started that round, I would probably need to say maybe Freitas maybe shaded it, but I could probably see it going the other way to Barrios, considering how he actually ended that 7th round.
Yeah, if blood to the eardrum wasn't enough for Barrios, it was getting worse for him in the 8th round, up to a point. The cut was getting worse. I thought he was starting to breathe heavily. And then suddenly, at the end of the round, he drops Freitas with the sort of left jab. Now, Freitas' foot did appear to slip on the ring logo, as the commentators pointed out, but it was a legitimate knockdown. Freitas accepted it. He was having a laugh and joke with the referee, Jorge Alonso, almost. He was a little bit embarrassed by it, by getting caught by such a shot. But the 10-8 lost round was no joke, and this definitely buoyed Barrios, because he came out in the 9th round and he was letting go with bombs. And this might have been a factor, I think, Andy, this 9th round, in him. He emptied the tank to a certain extent, and then by the time he got to the 10th, the 11th, and obviously the 12th, he was spent? Because
Yeah.
I think he let go of a lot of heavy shots in that ninth.
He let go a lot of shots after he dropped him with the jab as well, mate. And then obviously in the ninth round, as you say, I did think Freitas landed a solid right hand early in that round, actually. But Barrios, he just refused to back off. He still had his moments in the fight. In that round, you could see his eye was just getting worse, and it was an absolute bloody mess. And he was still landing some of his swinging shots, and he had a good shot that he probably won that round. He went into round 10, obviously. I don't know. I think it was around 10 where he tried to kind of wipe his face on the referee's shirt, actually, because it was that
Yes,
bad.
yeah, I was going to come to that, yeah.
But you could see Freitas, he looked more positive in his boxing. He was landing good overhand rights as well. Barrios missing big shots at times. And Freitas was moving back. He was jab, and he was trying to find his openings for the right hand. But you just couldn't deny Barrios. He just come back again. He landed a couple of good shots. Obviously, nowhere near the kind of technique we had, but obviously against Lomachenko and Linares, who would actually have one person would land, the other person would counter. A wee bit like that 10th round as well. One person would land a shot, then Barrios would come back with his own.
Yeah, Al Bernstein again for Showtime, a highly respected commentator and analyst. He felt that Freitas was controlling the action in the 10th. I actually thought that Barrios was doing better now, and he was not starting to take over, but he was definitely forcing the fight. And as you mentioned, I just loved how Barrios found a novel way of getting rid of the blood out of his eye by grabbing onto the referee's shirt and wiping the eye. I mean, why not? Have you ever seen anything like that before?
No, I have seen it before, actually. I'm trying to remember what fight now you mentioned it. James DeGale?
Which fight would that be? Wasn't the Jack fight, no?
Was it the George Groves? Or was it Groves that was badly cut in that fight? I'm trying to remember now.
So yeah, it's happened again since then. I mean, it's a novel approach, but I mean, it's effective. Why not?
I seem to recall maybe that it might have been the guy Davis, the referee. Oh, Richie Davis.
Yes.
I believe it might have been him, actually. It might be on the receiving end. I'd need to go back and check that fight. So anybody listening to this, you can let us know, please.
Yes, let us know if Richie Davis's white shirt was being stained by the blood of a fighter at some point. Freitas' reputation was in danger of being stained. He was obviously undefeated at this time, 33-0, but things were really starting to go a little bit pear-shaped for him. He was hurt by the Barrios right hand, which was starting to land there because Freitas wasn't getting out of range by the 11th round. And after he was hurt, he spat out the mouthpiece, didn't he? An old tactic. They've since clamped down on that, but back then, intentional, tactical. What do you think about the mouthpiece spit? It definitely gave him time.
I agree with you. I think he spat it out deliberately by time. If you watch some of the kind of, I'm not professing to be some sort of kind of expert in Argentinian boxing or South American box, but in the course of researching this sort of stuff, I came across some other South American fights, and I've seen it happen a couple of times. If you go and watch Gonzalez against Kogi, for example, the first fight, that was absolutely disgraceful, but we'll leave that for another time. But if it really did kick off in this round, actually, I mean, what a way to turn a fight. You would think, leading in, as I say, I'm going into the 11th round, I'm scoring this fight, and I'm saying to myself, I've got Barrios comfortably in front at this point. I might be wrong in saying, I mean, if you look at the scorecards officially, there was going into the last round, it was 105 even. 106 to 103 to Freitas, and 106 to 104 to Barrios. So everything was to play for here.
106, 104. I had it for the record.
I must have had it at 11th. I think I must have had it 106, 101. I think I need to go back and double check that though. But
yeah,
it's just I think it was like maybe 30 seconds into the round probably. Barrios, he landed a right hand that was just flush and just put Freitas directly on the seat of his arse. He just kind of rolled right on the spine of his back and that. You're thinking to yourself, Christ, the whole place goes up in the air, and you're thinking, that's it, the fight's over.
What a jab by Barrios that snapped.
Freitas is head back, and down goes Freitas again. That time, for real. Yep.
There's no way, unless he stands on his feet for the next 4-5 minutes, he's going to be the new champion. He's going to be the next legend of Argentina. Everything's going to be happening. It does happen. What happens? He spits out his gum shield. Time gets called. It's the old professional trick. We remember seeing
trainer takes his time, doesn't he, Oscar Suarez?
It's like a bit like Diego Corrales and
Castillo. Yeah, that's what I thought too.
So what happens? The fight gets called back on it. He gets his mouthpiece back, and Barrios goes all in for the knockout. Freitas is just moving, and he's not looking to engage, and he's just kind of like slipping him back, and then bang, right on the bell. Freitas lands a monster right hand that just drops Barrios. Well, it doesn't even drop him at first. Actually, it hits him with a shot, and it basically kind of tilts Barrios up onto his left foot. He's like standing there, just kind of hovering on one foot, and then when he goes, it's just like it's just like his brain's been rewired, and his whole being just dropped to the floor, and you think to yourself, that's it. There's no way he's getting up. You can see when he got up, he's thinking to yourself, what the fuck just happened to me? Because he's winning that fight, and then he gets hit with that shot, and he's thinking to himself, shit, I'm fucked. I've got no answers. And the thing is, I've got him up 5 points in the lead. I've got a 9-9 round. Both fighters drop, and you think to yourself, Christ. And that's where we go back to this. But I said at the start, about being one of the most pound for pound punchers at the time, and he turned it when he needed that power. And it's the last thing to go if you're like past your peak, if you're tired, but it's the last thing to go. It's going to be your power, and he turned it round about on its head, full circle with that shot. It was a beautiful right hand.
Another right hand lands by Freitas, but in this fight, he has not hurt Barrios severely with those right hands.
Freitas down a couple of times in the fight. In the last one, Barrios meant it. The first one, a partial slip. The last one had some power behind it.
Oh, look out, Barrios at the bell down. He doesn't know where he is.
Can't be saved.
Yeah, Barrios is trying to convince the referee as best he can that he's okay, but I mean, he's clearly in some distress, would be an understatement, and he's in against one of the biggest pound for pound punchers around at the time. And Freitas is not in the habit of letting people off the hook, because in the 12th round, Barrios is done by this point. Everyone can see that he's not at all recovered when he comes out for the 12th, and Freitas does what he did so many times, Andy. He stepped in, Barrios is doing the foxtrot, and Freitas just kills him off.
A huge right hand by Freitas. The best he's thrown tonight, and he's thrown some good ones.
A Hollywood right by Freitas. It was frantic in the Barrios corner. They touched gloves for the last round. He's in trouble, Barrios. It started with the right, and he's down again. You talk about heart. Left hand got in by Freitas. But Barrios fights back on very unsteady legs.
If Jorge Barrios makes it through this round, it will be one of the more astonishing performances you'll ever see. I don't know if it's going to happen, and I doubt it.
That was a slip. They should give this guy the Purple Heart. He doesn't know where he is. It's all over. It's all over. Freitas wins.
Exactly, and to be honest, you could have seen that fight being stopped way, right after the right hand, but he got dropped early in the 12th, and then I don't think he even got dropped the second time in the 12th round. Like, he kind of felt his knees, and the referee was saying, like, up you get, or calling it a slip, and he gets up and just literally staggers back like a drunk to the ropes, and the fight gets called off. It was just absolute pandemonium, because even, if I go back to the Sky broadcast, Adam Smith and I think it was Spencer Oliver, they were going absolutely mental in the commentary. So I don't know what Showtime were like, but and the crowd were going crazy. It was just an unbelievable turnaround, because as I say, there's absolutely no way up to that point, especially at that 11th round, that I felt. Well, put it this way, when he dropped him, when Barrios drops Freitas, you're saying, that's it, fight's over. If he gets up, if he can stand on his feet, he wins open points. But just to turn it around like that, it was just, that's something that always goes down in the annals of boxing. How to turn a fight on its head like that is absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, it reminds me of the famous HBO commentary from Eldrick Taylor's Chavez
yep.
Sr. If he gets up, he probably wins the fight. But of course, we all know with that one that it was not allowed to continue. We'll look at that one for another day. Just a few of the particulars here. Thanks to BoxRec Wiki for doing a nice summation of the fight and the statistics and stuff, actually. At the time of the stoppage, as you mentioned, Peter Trematera had it 105 even. Dennis Nelson had it 106-103. To Freitas, isn't that right? And Guy Jutra had it 106-104 to Barrios.
That's right, yeah.
That's right. Obviously, Freitas was making the third defence of his WBA super featherweight title and the 10th defence of his WBO super featherweight or junior lightweight title, as they were calling it here. The fight was called off at 50 seconds of the 12th and final round. Freitas just skimming in on the weight line of 130. Barrios came in a pound under at 129. And there's some nice little notes here as well, just to recap the particulars of the fight. Freitas was hit while off balance for a knockdown in the 8th round. Freitas was knocked down by a left-right combination, as we mentioned, in 42 seconds into the 11th. That was when he spat out his mouthpiece. Barrios, in turn, was then knocked out by a huge right hand to the chin as the bell sounded of the same 11th round. And then Barrios was knocked out with seconds, just seconds into the 12th round, pretty much. He fell to his knees 44 seconds into round 12. That was not ruled a knockdown, but he was in trouble. He was in big trouble by this point. And referee Jorge Alonso, who was a controversial character, I can't remember the exact particulars, but Alonso was involved in a fight in Miami at some point. I know he refereed Jeff Lacey, Robin Reed, but there was some issue with Alonso over someone being rabbit punched repeatedly. He was the referee, didn't deal with it, and one of the fighters died. Now, I should really have my statistics and my facts right if I'm saying that, but I definitely remember there was an issue with the referee Alonso. In this case, I think he did a decent job. Barrios obviously had the ruptured eardrum after round 6, as we said. He was cut badly around both eyes, and he wiped it on the referee's shirt towards the end. At the last knockdown, he was a battered mess, says the BoxRec Wikipedia, and Freitas was pretty much unmarked. Just before we look at their respective careers from this point onwards, any final things you want to add in there about this fight, Andy?
Yeah, it's just it's probably one of those fights actually that probably goes under the radar. Unless you're an absolute hardcore boxing fan, you've probably never heard or seen of this fight. One of those fights that goes under the radar, as I say, but if you think about what I said at the start of the show there, but anything between 80 and 90 million people watch Freitas on TV back in Brazil, and Barrios was like a superstar. The fight only took place in front of something like, was it 4,000 or 5,000 people? It was a very fervent crowd, though, wasn't it? It was though they were packed up for that one. It'd been one of those fights actually. If you think about it, if you want to kind of say to yourself, I wish I was there. It was a sample of that atmosphere, the kind of Latino atmosphere with Brazilians and Argentinians have been absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, just looking at their respective careers before we close out, Barrios skulked back over to Argentina with his tail between his legs. He kept on with the WBO route, though. In 2005, he knocked out 25-0 Mike Anchondo, who's a decent West Coast operator, to win the WBO super featherweight title, which had been vacated by this time by Freitas. He defended it against a variety of opponents. In Los Angeles against 24-0 Janos Nagy, was one of these Hungarians. He knocked him out. He then lost a split decision to the excellent 25-0 Joan Guzman. And it's been a while since I've watched that fight. I can't for the life of me understand that Guzman let it get to a split decision, but I must rewatch that one and see how it went down. He won a WBA crown, and then he went on to fight for a vacant WBO Latino bauble, getting knocked out by Rocky Juarez, who was a decent fighter back in the day. A couple more nondescript bouts, and then he finally hung up the gloves, did Mr. Barrios, after a win in Argentina in 2010. You were mentioning the Anchondo fight off air, Andy. Any standout moments of Barrios' career from Freitas onwards?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Anchondo lost the title on the scales. I think it was like something like 4 pounds over the weight limit. Barrios ended up, Anchondo was a decent fighter actually, but you could actually see he had nothing in that fight. Anchondo, Barrios just absolutely had his way with him. Obviously you mentioned his title defences and stuff, but for like 2007 to 2010, Barrios only fought like something like 5 times. So you think he's probably like living the life, so to speak. He went 4-1 in that time, 2 knockouts with the losses you say against Rocky Juarez in the 11th round. I believe it or not, he'd actually signed to fight Juan Manuel Marquez on September the 15th back in 2007 for WBC 130-pound title, but Barrios apparently withdrew an injury. It been another year actually before Barrios fought, and he lost to Rocky Juarez, as we mentioned there. And even with the inactivity, he remained in the top 10 in the rankings actually for the next 3 years between 2006 and 2008. Then naturally his career would probably come to an end in really kind of complicated circumstances, shall we say, because in January 2010 he was accused of killing a pregnant woman in a car accident.
Yeah, it got a bit nasty. I was gonna touch on that actually. A bit of a strange circumstance all around.
Yeah, so what apparently what happened was Barrios was driving a car, and there was a car sat at a zebra crossing, and Barrios' car basically ran right at the back of the car, who's then jumped onto the zebra crossing, and it's then ran over a pregnant lady. She died at the scene, I believe. Barrios has been accused of fled in the scene.
She was only 20 as well.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a dispute about there's allegations that Barrios apparently tried to bribe a witness over seeing a bottle of whiskey in his car, and there's also been discrepancies about when, because his toxicology levels came back negative, so there's then questions as to when he actually, those test levels were actually taken. October 2010, he fought again for the last time, and as you said, a 10th round unanimous decision victory. And then finally, in April 2012, he was found guilty of culpable homicide and sentenced to 4 years in prison. Released after 3 weeks later, after I think he was paid 200,000 Argentinian pesos for bail.
Sounds dodgy, doesn't it?
Yeah, but then he finally had to go back to jail in November 2014, and he finally served out the remainder of his sentence.
Right, yeah.
Yep. So it's just after then he's just obviously that was his career finished. I think by 2010 he was really looking to get back on the championship ladder. He was trying to get himself back into contention, but to have that happen, to have that instant to deal with, and obviously he's just basically been shunned, because I think if you look at some of the documentaries that I looked at, I think I maybe shared it with you, Steve, is the Argentinian public actually kind of sentenced and condemned him before he was actually even, officially kind of sentenced, so they've kind of a lot to deal with, obviously, and, I dare say the family, the deceased lady actually was seek compensation from her and stuff like that, but it was just a sad kind of tale all round as to how his career ended.
It certainly was. It did fare better for Freitas, but not much better. I mean, in his next fight after he defeated Barrios, he went on to win a unanimous decision, defending the WBO title against Artur Grigorian. He was 36-0. He was a neat boxer, Grigorian, but he'd fought a lot of nondescript opponents in Europe and stuff. And then there was the Diego Corrales fight, where finally Freitas tasted defeat after such a long winning record, 2004. I think he quit. Did he effectively quit? Did he quit on his stool in this one, didn't he, against Corrales pretty much? And then, I mean, after that, 2006, he beat Zahir Rahim, who's obviously famous for defeating Eric Morales and nearly upsetting the Morales-Pacquiao rematch. That was the vacant WBO title. And then another quit for Diaz. This was one that stung him in 2007. Up-and-comer baby bull Juan Diaz, 31-0. Just had too much activity for Freitas. And he quit on his stool. I remember that fight, actually, a lot of boos in the arena. People weren't happy at all. And then that created a 5-year hiatus for Freitas. He didn't come back until 2012 with a win. Then 3 years after that, he came back in 2015 with a win. And then in 2017, just November last year, he was fighting Gabriel Martinez. So he keeps talking about comebacks all the time. But, I mean, just looking at his personal life here, he's a national hero, as we mentioned at the beginning. He ended up getting involved in different companies and money. And I think, it said on Wikipedia that he divorced the wife, which he was going through the acrimonious divorce at the time of the Barrios one. But then I think he got into politics in the end, and he's dabbled a little bit. I'm not quite sure about his financial situation, but considering he'd been such a proud, hard-punching warrior, the losses to Corrales and Diaz, they sting a little bit on the record.
Especially the way, I think at this point he's past his prime. I mean, obviously there is questions. There's other unification fights. You had Floyd Mayweather kind of kicking around the rankings and that as well. That fight could or should have happened at some point. Stevie Forbes and that type of thing. Jesus Chavez, but I think against the likes of Corrales, I remember seeing that fight. I think he got knocked down 3 times, and basically said after the third knockdown he didn't want to continue. Basically, I think it just mentioned about spitting the mouthpiece out to buy time against Barrios. I'm sure he might even spat the mouthpiece out against Diego as well, actually. So I really think, especially those two defeats. The one against Corrales maybe does affect his legacy a little bit. Diaz, I can see he's probably past his prime by this point. As you mentioned, I mean, there was like months and then like years of inactivity and retirement and stuff. So obviously he was like a kind of semi-retired part-time fighter. Clearly the Barrios fight must have taken a lot out of him. As I say, he made 130 for the best part of what his career. He made 10 successful title defenses, WBO belt. At some point they had to kind of catch up with him. The Casamayor fight was probably the one that really kind of catapulted him to the likes of the kind of superstardom, and kind of like more the kind of the English speaking audience rather than kind of Western, I was going to say, but more English speaking audience. but I just think he kind of hung around too long, especially after the kind of Corrales fight. He's kind of getting himself back, and you can't blame him for kind of coming back, beating Zahir Rahim, who's a good fighter, and he beat Morales, if I'm rightly, as well.
Very tricky, wasn't he?
Yeah, and he come back and win the title again for the third time. But then he was out for a year, and he loses to an upcoming Juan Diaz, who, as you say, just too much for him. And he just disappeared. So I just think, to consider a wee bit like Ray Leonard in that respect, he would take hiatuses, and maybe that kind of affects his final standing, I suppose. But one thing you could probably say as well is that, well, I don't know if it's true or not, but I've read two instances as to why the Floyd fight never happened. One was because he didn't really want the fight, which, to be honest, Floyd Mayweather, I've said before, was one of the greatest fighters at 130. If you want to mention Floyd's career, that is his career for me. 130 was like amazing to watch Floyd Mayweather. And probably the second one was, believe it or not, Steve, this one still gets used to this day. Freitas was with Showtime and Floyd was with HBO.
That's
and
right.
that was one of the excuses they used as to why that
Floyd
fight
was
never
in the
happened.
infamous slave contract at the time, wasn't he? And the fights just weren't getting made at that point.
Exactly, mate. So, but you've got to thank Showtime, as I say, as you says, for making that fight, and it turned into, even though, as you says, Barrios not being as refined, and Freitas being a decent boxer, it turned into a really, really good fight in the end.
Yeah, I've said it before in the pod. I think one of the great shames around that super featherweight era at that time, you had Floyd, who was the WBC champion after he beat Gennaro Hernandez and went on the great run. And you had Freitas, who was the WBO champion. And you had Casamayor, who was the WBA champion. And you had Paul Spadafora, who was the IBF champion. And it was such a shame that the quartet of fights didn't really come off with any great regularity. The only fight that happened between the four was obviously the Freitas-Casamayor fight. Now, I agree with you. If Floyd had fought Freitas, he would have just made a mug of Freitas. I could see Freitas doing no mass. He would have quit against Floyd. The interesting fight between the four, which isn't really relevant to our discussion tonight, I think would have been Spadafora against Floyd. Because even though Spadafora was quite upright, he was tall, he had a good jab, and by all accounts, I know Rob Kelly and Oisin Fagan have mentioned this on the pod before, Spadafora gave Floyd fits in sparring. This was a younger, less mature Floyd. But it's just a shame that between them, Spadafora, I mean, Jesus, he's in a state now. He looks, he's a literal crackhead. But it's a shame the four of them didn't get it on to any greater measure than we only saw Casamayor Freitas.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the other fighter I'm talking about as well is it's Sin McCall Singawatcha.
Yes, I remember him, yeah.
That was him that fought the French guy. What's his name?
Not Monsepor, no?
Monsepor, that was it. So
was that not Somsak Sith Chachawal, or did he fight him as well?
Sorry, this is the one that fought Yukihiro Takahisha. My Thai fighters mixed up there.
It's easy done.
Easy done, mate. But there was, again, probably this year and like last year, we've been really lucky that some of these divisions were getting these fights made and that. But there was a time, 2016. Remember, 2016 was awful when they getting these fights made across the divisions. We're getting shit after shit, and it's a shame we never got those fights back in that time. But unification fights. WBO belt was probably still kind of considered the kind of poor man's title at that time. I mean, if you look at the kind of history of the WBO title at that time, going into that fight, you probably had the guys, apart from De La Hoya, you had like John Molina, Kamel Bou Ali, Daniel Londas, and you got Jimmy Bradell, and you got Regil Tour, who was a Dutchman from, I think he came from Surinese.
It was Suriname or one of the islands, yeah.
Barry Jones, and you had Alexandriov, Freitas, Corrales, Anchondo, Barrios, Guzman, Alex Arthur, Nicky Cook, Roman Martinez, Ricky Burns. There's not really kind of distinguished list of champions there, actually, when you think about it. But when you look at, like, say, the WBA, I actually had the list up there, actually. Freitas, obviously, he unified. The Thai fighter, Sorn, is it Nanthachi? Vincent Mosquero, I think that's the guy that Valero absolutely bludgeoned in 2 or 3 rounds.
That's right, yeah.
So there's another fighter coming in before there. Edwin Valero would be coming in there around about, say, early 2000 mark in that. So
yeah.
Freitas would obviously be up in weight by that point, but he vacated the titles in 2003. He got up to lightweight, so just slightly too early. But then you obviously like Uchiyama coming in, Salgado, Linares came in there late as well, Javier Fortuny. But it's just a shame these fights never happened.
It certainly is. Just in conclusion on the one that did happen, my overriding thoughts about Freitas Barrios, I think the fact that it was in such a hot, volatile arena, it really did make for a great fight. Brazil versus Argentina, all the ingredients were there. Two massive punchers right in their primes. Fair play to Showtime getting this one on. And it was just such a fun fight. There was knockdowns, there were incidents, there were cuts, there were fells. It just had a little bit of everything, and I really enjoyed this fight.
Really enjoyed the researching this one actually, because obviously I was trying to find footage of Barrios and I would never have known, and I found that documentary. I didn't know about the car accident and stuff, so it's been really good actually kind of researching this one. And obviously Freitas, I didn't know much about his personal life and that, but I found that he got into politics, and just kind of like watching some of the old fights, that Barry Jones, and get some of the kind of inside information and that, going back to that fight. I mean, it's a shame that, considering that Barry Jones was a champ at one point, he had the title stripped from him for a failed brain scan, and then he finally got the ruling overturned, and he finally got his license back. But if you go and watch that fight against Freitas and Barry Jones, he took a trimming in that fight. But you got to give it to him; he kept getting up. Brave wee bastard. Well done, Barry.
Yeah, well done, Barry. Good commentator as well on Box Nation. Now, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thanks very much for Andy for jumping on. Also, thanks to Dave the Hater Lowback for doing all the editing for us. And thanks to you for subscribing on Patreon. We hope you enjoy what we're putting out. As I say always, if there's anything that you want in particular, any fights or any bits of research or whatever done, then give us a shout. And if you haven't seen this fight, or if you haven't seen it in a while, go back and watch it. That's the point of the Punches from the Past series, really, from right back to season 1 as well. They're great fights, and they have great storylines, little narratives, and it's definitely worth a watch. So thank you everybody for subscribing and for listening, and we'll be back with you again next month. I've been Steve Wellings. Thanks to Andy as well, and we'll catch you again soon, guys. Cheers. Bye.